going to be recorded. And I want to welcome y'all to the July Power Systems Virtual User Group webinar. And hope you're having a great summer. Just have a couple of, well, maybe just one thing to talk about before we get started on our topic for today. And that is the IBM Technical University. I think the best conference that IBM puts on for technical people especially. And the next one is October, so I know it's just July. October seems a long ways off, but believe me, it's going to get here pretty fast. October 7th to 11th in Las Vegas. I have a discount code for the Power Systems VUG. It's the TUV VUG, TUVVUG. Gets you the discount code of $20.95. So please, if you're going to register, use the discount code, get the reduced rate. And if you don't have anybody else, please put my name in as the IBM rep that told you about the conference. That helps get me there. Yep. And if you go there, let me know. I'd love to hook up with you if you're there, and I might even have a few more shirts to give away, or stickers at least, to anybody that's there. So I hope you can make that. Really do think this is the best conference and really do promote it. And people like our speaker today, Gareth, and maybe even Nigel can go there, and plus a lot of other people that give these great sessions that you hear every now and then here. I'll also go ahead and take this opportunity to tell you about the next session, which is actually next week. It's an IBM I-specific session, so if you're not really IBM I, you maybe don't care, but if you're running IBM I, IBM I 7.4, which is the newest released version out, it's got some way cool stuff in it. Steve Will, who is the chief architect of IBM I, is going to tell us about the features. That's next week. So I know 2 webinars this month. It's a bonus month for you. So with that, let's get to today's session. And today we're going to talk about kind of a general topic, tricks of the Power Masters. And we have a couple of Power Masters on. Our presenter, Gareth Coates, is the trickster. And we've got on the background, Nigel Griffiths, his cohort and partner in crime in the UK, is going to help answer some questions, which is always fun. So Gareth, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you. And I know you're in the UK and you do all kinds of stuff with the Power Systems and been doing it a long time, so you've had a lot of time to develop these tricks. But I'll let you go ahead and say, and you've actually presented for us before, I think, on an old version of the tricks that was several years ago. So if you have anything else to say, I'll go ahead and let you. But otherwise, I'll turn it over to you, and I will stop sharing so that you can take over.
Okay.
There you go.
So I'm clicking on share, but it's grayed out.
I just made you the presenter. I don't know if I needed to do that, but there you go.
That's better, yeah. So share my screen, and then if I do that, hopefully that goes to full screen.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep, just put it like right there. It looks great.
Looks good.
I love that big logo you got there too, man.
I don't know where I got that from. Funnily enough, I've got a T-shirt with that logo on it. It's very nice.
Good.
Yes, as Joe was saying, hopefully this will be a useful session, tips and tricks that I've picked up from my experience from colleagues and friends and various other sources, mainly the internet and things like that. There's a disclaimer there which is quite important. If you are root or the equivalent of, or HSC root or whatever, you can do damage to your system, and if I'm not there, you can't really turn around and blame me. So do be careful. Some of the things that I talk about today will be potentially dangerous, so just be cautious. If you've got little tips and tricks which you think might be useful to other people, do feel free to send them to me. My email address is on the first page, and if I do present your trick, I will definitely give you credit. They come from all sorts of places. A few in here from Nigel today, and I was quite pleased. We tend to proofread each other's foils, and he was saying to me earlier that he was quite impressed that some of the scripts actually did what they were supposed to do. He didn't think that there was a chance that they would do. But anyway, let's move on. This was my inspiration. It's a book. It's pretty old now. But it particularly struck a chord with me sort of 20, 30 years ago when I was first playing around with Unix in the late 1980s and playing with Linux in the early 90s. So we cover a lot of subjects. Firstly, this one is the HMC. I do a lot of work on the HMC, and I would hope that everybody on the call who uses HMCs is using the Enhanced Plus version and not the old Classic version. If you need Power, or if you've got Power 9 servers, you will be needing HMC version 9. But even if you don't have Power 9 servers, you really ought to be using the version 9 of the HMC. And as you're probably aware, the HMC started off being an Intel-based computer. It's now a Power 8-based server. There's no need for it to be a Power 9-based server. It does run the code very well, and lots of people thought that the Classic version was fast and the Enhanced Plus version was slower, but it's so much quicker now, and if you haven't moved across, you really ought to. I also point out that this is how we like to keep our HMC. We like all the systems to be green. We like no attention LEDs and no serviceable events. Now, obviously, bad things can happen. You could have a little flutter on the network, and RMC might lose communication for a while, and an LED goes on or a serviceable event happens. But it's worth clearing them down so that if another thing happens, you get a positive indication that, that there's something to look at. Now, something that can cause people confusion is they can remove a system from their HMC, and then later on they reconnect the same server, and unfortunately the HMC doesn't find the system. Classic for this would be perhaps something like you've got Power 8 computers, you put some Power 9 servers in, you take a Power 8 server away, and then you bring it back to the HMC, and you connect it up and DHCP doesn't work. And that's probably because there is an entry for the IP address in a particular file. The file is called /opt hsc data.hmc.removed. You can cap that file and you can have a look at what's in there. And you can also list lssyscon-r non-discover. It will tell you the contents of that file effectively. And if you want to be able to rediscover them again, you can use mcsyscon -o auto. Now, until I found this out, it took me a very long time because I was always reinstalling my HMC to try to get it to rediscover. This was in the days of Power 5, so it can be quite useful. Another thing that happens quite often is that people will install their HMC, and the temptation is during the boot when you're being asked to change the keyboard mapping or enable display configuration. What happens is that you say, don't bother asking me next time, and then you realize that in fact you've got a US keyboard and you're not in the US, or your language is set up incorrectly, and you think to yourself, how on earth do I re-enable this? And the only way to do it is on the command line, and you can see the two chhmc commands that you'd use there to change those. And then the next time you reboot, it'll come up and ask you. Once you've got them set up correctly, it is worth telling the HMC not to ask you next time, because it adds a couple of minutes to the reboot time, and you really don't need slow reboots. Now, not very long ago, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Laura Corley contacted me. She's a friend, an ex-IBMer. She used to run the certification class writing courses. And she had a colleague who wanted to see the difference between the properties of a running partition and its profile, the profile which it was booted with. Had anybody done any dynamic LPAR on it? And I started working on it. I thought, this won't be difficult. And then actually, when you get down to things like the virtual adapters and the physical adapters, it does start to get a bit difficult. And I thought, somebody must have done this already. And I came across this beautiful utility called PRDiff. It's a Perl script, so you need Perl to be installed. Well, that's not a problem. And you have it on a Unix machine or Linux machine which has got SSH access to an HMC, and you can see I've run the command here, -h hsc root at HMC15. So this is the HMC that I'm going to talk to. -m and the machine name, and -l and then the LPAR name, the LPAR here was produced with PowerVC, so it's quite a long LPAR name. You can see it was booted with a default profile. This is what's in the profile, and this is what's running. And you can see that I've actually added half a CPU's worth of entitlement, but I've reduced the memory from 8 gig down to 6 gig, and there's also a new adapter in there. So what a lovely utility. Where do I get it from? Well, it's called PRDiff, and if you search for it on the internet, you'll find it. It's written by this guy here, Brian Smith, who's a very competent AIX and power expert. He's also available on Twitter, and it's worth following him. He's got a blog which I've got a link to up here. So you can see all of the information down here. He gives you in the help messages about what the actual meanings are of the various parts of the descriptions of some of the adapters there. Now, you should be aware that the Power 9 based servers don't have DVD drives, nor indeed do the Power 8 based HMCs. It is useful. I know that not everybody is allowed to use USB sticks, but it is useful to use them if you are able to. Nigel and I use them a lot for installing new versions of HMC code and other things when we're doing the early support programs. And this is just a quick way to show you how you'd go about it. So you'd select the HMC management, and you can format some media. You select the particular device and you can give it a name, you format the media, and then you can take backup the management console data, and that will do a backup of the critical console data, which is most of the information which changes. And you've also got the ability to do a save upgrade data if you're doing an upgrade. But with the version 9 of the HMC, pretty well everything is an update, not an upgrade. So whereas in the past, if you're going from say 7.3 to 7.4 of the HMC, you'd have to do a complete install. What you do now is once you're at 9, it's just basically an update of your HMC. And this shows you, as I say, how you'd go through the process of doing the format and the backup. A few notes now about the VIO server and a shared storage pool. Plug for Nigel here. He's got his expert blog and some excellent resources there, and also on his YouTube channel, got lots of good information about shared storage pools. They are so good. You just create a new partition and allocate it a little bit of storage from the shared storage pool, and it means that your storage is automatically available to all partitions which are clients of the shared storage pool, which means that live partition mobility just works. It's all set up. Now, as Joe mentioned, I've been doing these trick sessions for some time. I think I started back in about 2011, and I try to update it, big update once a year sort of thing. But every now and then people contact me and say, oh, there was something in there some time ago, how do you do it? I don't mind people asking me questions like that, not at all. And in fact, Mark Hayes from Israel contacted me on the same time the other day, and he said there was something about which BIOS provides your vSCSI, and he was after it for virtual fiber channel. And in fact, both of those are there. So what this is a VIO server, but I've run OEM_setup_env to become root. And there's a facility called KDB in AIX, which is the kernel debugger. And so effectively what we're doing here is printing or echoing CVAI into KDB, the kernel debugger, and then grepping the output for vSCSI. And we're getting rid of some stuff with the grep-v. And you can see here that vSCSI 0 comes from VIO server, in this case called plum-VIO1, and it maps to vhost 0. And similarly, information for vSCSI 1. If we're looking for NPIV, we echo VFCS into KDB, and so on. Now, do be careful. The KDB, kernel debugger, can be interactive. In this case, we're just echoing something into it or printing something into it, which is far safer than actually going into it interactively, because if you do go into it interactively, you do have to be root in order to run it, but it does mean that you're able to tweak around with memory locations and do all sorts of dangerous things within there, and it's very easy to break your system. Thanks to Mike Lee for helping me out with that particular one with the PFCs. Now, AIX, what a wonderful operating system. IBM don't spend enough money marketing it, in my humble opinion, but it is a lovely operating system. This is something which Chris Gibson pointed out. This is new in AIX 7.2 technology service pack 2. LPAR-STAT-S now gives you the name of the service partition of the machine, if there is one. In this case there isn't, and also the number of LPARs which are configured. So that was a useful little addition to that version of the operating system. Chris Gibson is a great resource as well. I would follow him on Twitter, advise you to do that, and also keep track of his blog. More details on that coming up. Now, TCP dump, very useful program. It tells you everything that's going on the network. The trouble is that if it tells you that something's going on a network, that's information's coming to you over the network, which is information coming over the network, so it has to tell you about that. So as soon as one character comes out, it goes on literally forever. So you can work around that problem. Now, a number of years ago, I read a great book called Titavoulas, the Verbiage Collector, and this was a little minor devil or fiend who had to go around collecting all the verbiage that there was, all the unnecessary words that were kicking around, and I think of TCP dump as that. So somebody wanted to get the information coming through their shared Ethernet adapter. So on the VIO server, I ran lsmap -all-net, correct for the SCA, so I can see that the shared Ethernet adapter is ENT3. So therefore, I'm assuming that the interface is EN3. So I became root, ran TCP dump on the interface EN3, and I say here that the port is not SSH, so I don't want any SSH information because that's how I got onto the HMC, and also that the host is not the VIO server which I'm actually sitting on. And then I get information coming out which is not full of all of the verbiage which you'd otherwise expect. It will go on forever, assuming that you're using your VIO server, and the way to get out of it is with a Control-C. Very useful little facility. Now, another one here from Nigel. You all really ought to know about loop mounting. So you have an ISO file, an ISO file on AIX. You can do this on Linux with a mount -o loop, similar sort of thing. But in AIX, this is the particular syntax. So you're mounting it, mounting this ISO image onto a mount point here, and the options are the type of the virtual file system is CDRFS, and it's read-only. And this is the unmount command. Nigel pointed out recently that you can also do this with an image of a USB stick, and also note that this will only work on certain releases. So on the later releases it does work, and it doesn't work on some of the older ones. But notice that the VIO server 3.1.0.10 is TL3 of 7.2, so that works perfectly okay. That's very useful because, of course, your VIO server might be a way to virtualize out the storage to other clients. Now, Linux. I've been using Linux now for a long time. Thoroughly enjoy it. I use it a lot at home as well as at work. So this is a useful account to follow on Twitter, Command Line Magic. They come up with all sorts of useful tips and tricks. This is Tune2FS, so the tuning file system, because by default Linux ext2, 3 and 4 file systems will save 5% of the space for use by root when the file system is filling up. I can remember when I first started working with Unix, it was traditionally 10%, but on an 8 terabyte drive, 4% would hold 300 HD quality movies. So it's recommended that you maybe tone that down a bit to save wasting, or effectively wasting, some of your memory space. This is a little command I find I use a lot when I'm tinkering around. I often will have I'll develop a directory tree, and there'll be a lot of maybe directories which I end up with being empty, or potentially just underneath a particular directory there are lots of directories. You've been through, I don't know, deleting perhaps language files, the manual pages in languages which you don't speak or something like that, and you've deleted the files. Now you want to delete the directories, and so this is a simple little thing. It is find from dot minus type D, so counting the number of directories that we've got, and then find from dot, and then minus depth. So that says go all the way down to the bottom of the tree and work your way back up. Type D, so directories, empty ones, and then if it finds that it's empty, it does an rmdir of the particular directory, and it just carries on the loop, and then it again it does the count and it tells you. So in this case, I went down from 435 to 311 different directories. So I've got a file in user local bin called remove or delete empty directories. So very useful. Quite often you want to run a command on a regular basis. Sometimes you want to limit the amount of time it will run for. Now in this particular case, this works in the bash. There is an internal called timeout. So I've got this down in the Linux section. It would work just as well in bash on AIX, but I say tell me what the time is, then I say timeout is 10 seconds, sleep for 60. So you see here that at 15, 36 and 35 seconds we started the sleep, but it should have gone on for a minute, but actually after 10 seconds it bailed out. That can be quite useful if you want to set a timeout on a particular process. I think it was Nigel who prompted me for this one as well. In Linux, in Vim, or VI is normally alias to vvim, it will try to use some nice colors so that, for example, comments are a particular color and variable settings are a different color and so on. Depending on your particular eyesight and depending on the version or the type of screen that you've got, you may find it easy or you may find it difficult to see particular colors. So you can have a look in this file and you can see that there are a number of different colors, and within Vim you can run color scheme, spelt the American way, and then you give it the name of the color scheme. So this is Delec and this is Desert. So if I come down to this screen, you can see that, for example, I find this blue color quite difficult to read, but I find this yellow color a lot easier to read. So depending on the color of the background of your screen, as I say, the color rendering of your screen, you can play around with those and find the particular color scheme which you may prefer. I've got some notes coming up as well about VI in a bit more detail. Okay, moving on to the shell, the CLI, generally the environment of the machine. Again, Nigel here, more verbiage. This was Nigel saying that if you're on Linux and you run ps-ef, you get a load of kernel threads coming out, which you're probably not interested in. You know, if you're trying to find the top processes and you're not running nmon and you're not running top, you want to see, you know, you're not particularly interested in all of these kernel processes. Notice that process 2 is the kernel thread daemon, and it spawns off. It's the parent process ID of all of these processes. Nigel looked at this and he thought, well, actually, if I get rid of the things which end with a closed square bracket, and now that's the end of the line, I'll save a lot of space. So he's gone there. He's got this down from, what was it, from 170 processes down to 45 by doing a grep-v closed square bracket $, and you know, this is the output that he gets. So he gets rid of all of those processes. So that's a useful thing to know. There's another way of doing things as well. So here, this was what I said, the proper way to do it, if you like. PS-F, and then PPID 2, oops, hit the enter button there, -N, capital N, and that will get rid of process 2, and, well, it shows you process 2, but it gets rid of all of the parent process IDs, which are 2, so it gets rid of all of those threads. That's a different way of doing it. So let's see the difference in time. Well, it's virtually non-existent. So obviously, if you're just doing it on the command line, you're probably going to do it Nigel's way, because it's the way that your brain thinks. You think, this is what I want a list of all of this stuff, and then I just want to get rid of some of the noise. And that's a nice, easy way to do things. If you do it if you like, the official way, you save what, 0.02 of a real second. It's just not worth a bother. The thing is, though, that actually, if you were doing this repeatedly and you've got a very busy system, doing it with the grep would be spawning another process, and it would also be doing loads of context switches. So typically you will do it the nice easy way, but if you're putting something into a script, you really should think about perhaps looking at the best way of doing things. Rather than doing pipe to grep, pipe to grep, pipe to grep, pipe to grep, use a decent regular expression. Now this is something that cropped up a long time ago for me. Somebody wanted to move a bunch of files from one place to another place, and they didn't have recursive copy on their particular system, and so somebody suggested this is the way to do it: tar cf- dot. So in other words, create an archive on standard output from where we are, pipe to CD to somewhere else, and then untar it. That works fine, but if you do it with a double ampersand instead of a semicolon, what that says, the double ampersand says, only execute this part of the pipeline or the sequence of commands if this part works. And that's quite useful, quite important if you had a variable. For example, if you had a CD into $something and $something didn't exist, that would be CD space, which of course takes you to the root directory. And if you're root, you'd be untarring stuff all over the root directory. So sometimes it's useful to use the double ampersand. And equally, if you use double pipe, that means only execute this part if this part didn't work. In other words, if the exit code was non-zero. So that can be quite useful. Little tip, get a set of Unix utilities which you can run on Windows. I used to use Cygwin many years ago, and I've just carried it forwards. Every time I've got a new laptop, a new ThinkPad, I've just carried it across. I've got a C://jazz/bin directory or something that's got all the files in. I just carry it across, and I can use grep and vim and sed and all those nice things on Windows as well. Also notice here, grep can be recursive. Very useful. So, for example, if I'm looking for something in my putty logs, I can cd into that directory, and I can say grep -l-i for ignore case, capital R, what string I'm looking for, and then I can say dot, and it will recursively search all the way through. Just a tip, you might want to redirect standard error to dev null, because there'll probably be files or directories that you can't get into, and so on. There is a difference between a little r and a big R. Basically, it's whether or not it follows symbolic links or whether it doesn't. So quite often people are familiar with a particular command, but there are other features to it which they're not aware of. 2 tricks on 1 page here. I find this very useful in shell scripts. I quite often use this kind of strategy. So I say, if uname -s is Linux, then this command echo is a variable equals echo-e, and if it's AIX, it's echo equals echo, and then I can say $echo, and it will just have it set up correctly. So it'll cope with the \\t, which is a tab, and \\c, which is don't do a carriage return. So that's one trick, but the main trick is this bit down here. So I'm setting a variable. It's set to be 100, and then I do a read of a different variable, and I say if that variable s has been set, then use it. Otherwise, use the variable 100. And so if I run that script, it says, tell me where to start, or else I'll start at 100. And I say 1, 2, 3, and it says, okay, I'll start at 1, 2, 3. But if instead of hitting or entering a number here, I just hit carriage return, it will default to 100. And it works obviously for strings as well as for numbers. So that can be very useful. Okay, I promised that we'd have some more stuff about VI, and here it is. So if you say VI +/purpose and then a name of a file, it will go to the first line containing that particular string. That can be quite useful. VI +20 onto a particular file will open it at line 20. I find this quite useful with things like when you do an SSH and it tells you that there's an offending entry at line 256, you can use VI +256 on that file name that it gives you, cut and paste, and bang, away you go. In VI, if you put your cursor onto a parenthesis and you hit %, it will flash between the matching parentheses. So that's quite useful when you've got a syntax error trying to trace where a problem is. If you use set number or set new or set no new, it will turn line numbering on and off. And you can say set list, set no list, and that will show things like tabs, and it'll put a $ at the end of the line and so on. Another one here, ignore the case or don't ignore the case. That's very useful for looking for particular variables, or if you're not sure whether somebody's put, I don't know, HMC in capital letters or in lowercase letters. And in your user's home directory, there is a file called, well, there might be a file called dx.exrc, which is the run control file, in other words, the startup file for VI. So you can put things like this into your .exrc file, and you could put therefore your color scheme in there as well. VI can be extremely powerful. You can do very clever things with it, and also with sed and awk. These often revolve around regular expressions. I'm a great believer in regular expressions. I've even I had a session as a technical university on regular expressions. So I'm not suggesting that you try to become an expert in VI overnight, although there are worse things you could do. But it's worth having a look on the internet for some good cheat sheets. Download them, keep them on your local hard disk. Even if you don't memorize how to do everything, if you go through them, you'll see the sort of things that you can do. So you can yank to the end of the line, or you can yank a part of a line. You can map keys so that instead of having to keep entering particular expressions, you can just map them to particular keystrokes. You can set up ranges, all sorts of things that you can do. And so it's worth scanning some good cheat sheets so that you know the sort of things are available. And then when you do need to use them, you can go and have a look at the cheat sheet. Okay, in different versions of operating systems, there are differences. So for example, in VI on Linux, :wn will write the current file and open the next file for editing. So if you say VI star, :w on the first one would just write the first one. If you say :wn, it would write the first one and then open the second one. In AIX, it's not recognized. But in Linux, if you put a space in, then it will write the current file to a file called n, which might not be what you're after. The main thing is just to be aware. I generally will not ever do this. I'll always write the file and then say :n as a separate VI command. I use the binary calculator a lot. It's standard on Unix systems. It's very quick, it's very powerful, and if I've got a shell there and I need to do a little bit of calculation, it's quicker than me trying to find a calculator on my Windows screen and then using cut and paste between the two. So the first surprise is that the scale is 0, which means that if you say 1/2 in binary calculator, you get an answer of 0 because it doesn't do any There's no scale. In other words, there's no number of decimal places afterwards. But it's a variable scale. So what you can do is you can set the scale in BC. So here I set it to be 60, and that will give me 60 decimal places. By default, I use BC-L. That L loads in the maths library and automatically sets the scale of 20. It effectively does its calculations in decimal because it's got a base 10 on both the input and the output. But there are other things that you can do. You can do trig, probably not terribly useful in everyday life as a Unix administrator, but it might be. You can do logs, both natural logs and log to the base 10s. As I say, you can do all sorts of stuff with trig. You can also do base conversion. This is very useful. So you can say O base, which is the output base. If you say that becomes 16, you enter a number in decimal, it comes out in hexadecimal. If you do a calculation in decimal, it comes out as hexadecimal. You can set the I base to be 16, the input base. And if you set O base equals 10, because we had it set to be, once we've run I base equals 16, we're now working in hexadecimal. So we set the output base to be 10, and here we're calculating or converting back from hex into decimal. Of course, you could be using octal, you could be using base 3, you could be using base 62, whatever base you like. It will work just fine as long as you set the base correctly. Another standard command on Unix, which you do need to be careful of, is the calendar command, or cal. So here I ran cal 7 2019, and that's this month that we're in right now. If you run cal 7 19, it's the year 19 AD, not the year 2019. So do be careful of that. And this is an interesting one, cal 9 1752. I believe this was the shortest month we ever had. You'll notice that there's a big gap between the 2nd and the 14th. Those days just didn't exist. It's when we changed the calendar. So that's not actually a bug, but it's often a good way to win a pint in a bet against a Unix newbie. In Linux, you can run cal-3 and you get last month, this month, next month, which is quite nice. Again, I often find it quicker. I've always got a Unix screen open on my desktop. It's quicker to do that than it is to look at trying to scroll through to a particular calendar. Now, quite often you'll be using your terminals and something will happen. You'll run a shell script which crashes out and it'll have done some nasty sort of mapping in the key in the sequence, and the terminal will be screwed up, to use a colloquialism. And it might be that things like new lines don't work. So a few things you can try. Use a Control J rather than hitting carriage return. Control J is a new line to Unix, whereas most, for example, laptop keyboards think that it needs to have a carriage return in there as well. So Control J followed by STTY sane, Control J. You can also try tput reset and tput init. These are ways of resetting some of the settings that you might have. Ultimately, you may need to close the window and start it again, but sometimes it can be useful to, for example, keep the history that you might have on the terminal. Now, NL, this is very much like cat-n. It shows line numbers, and this little bit of clip art here is supposed to be something a bit like a cat. So in Linux, particularly nice, it skips empty lines by default, because quite often you've got a whole pile of empty lines in the file, and it might be nicer to see it on one screen rather than 2 or 3 screens. So that can be just a little tip there, it might be useful. And I quite like this one, column. You could do this quite easily with SED or with other tools, but what the column does here is it takes the input file, and I've said here, sort me on change a tab on the field separator of a colon, and so you can see here that it's now got these nicely into a tabulated list. So it's a very simple way to tabulate your output. I always use a fixed font size, like Courier, for example, in my things like instant messaging, because it means that I can cut and paste straight from a Unix screen, and it means that everything's nicely tabulated. I think that having things nicely tabulated is far more easy to understand than having things all higgledy-piggledy. Just going to take a sip of a drink here. One of the things which we tend to do in my little group is we work with new product introduction, and I particularly was asked to do some testing on live partition mobility. And so when we got our first Power 9 machines, we did a lot of testing. We did find a couple of bugs, which I'm glad to say all got fixed before general availability, but I think we got up to something like 50,000 migrations between two Power 9 machines before GA. And now I wasn't sitting there clicking things on the HMC. I was obviously running a script. And the trouble was that if the terminal session died, then the script will die. And so if I shut down my laptop, or if the network dropped for some reason from my laptop to the data center, the whole thing would die. So I ran it under a utility called Screen, which is a GNU-based utility available for Linux and Unix, and it just works perfectly on AIX, so no problems there. I've got some more notes on it coming up. So I ran it on the Screen. That meant that if my window died, the application or the shell script would carry on running. But occasionally, I'd want to cut and paste from the count, the number of migrations that I'd done, to put it into a report. Trouble was that muscle memory says you highlight it and you hit Control-C. And of course, on Windows, Control-C does a copy, but typically on Unix, it's an interrupt, and it would stop the process. So I changed the interrupt character. So in my shell script, I said stty space intra space Control F, which I entered with a Control V, Control F. So then it meant that if I wanted to interrupt the program, I could do with a Control F, but if I hit Control C, nothing happened. Guess what? I also had a default to start. So if I did have to restart the program, it would start at the would prompt me to want to start at the number it had last achieved. So actually very useful. Now Screen here, you can go and download it from there. It's a window manager, so you run Screen and it just starts up a shell. That's very simple. And then you can start multiple other windows in parallel, so you only see one at a time. But it means that you could have, for example, one session could be logged into one machine, one session could be logged into another machine, another session could be sitting reading your email, and so on. The nice thing is that you can detach it. The standard keystroke that you use to interact with a program is Control-A. So, for example, Control-AC will create you a new window, Control-AD will detach the screen. That means that you can shut down your laptop, go and start to work somewhere else, boot up your laptop, and then you can use Screen -R, and it will just resume the screen session with all of your windows running underneath. It's a very nice facility for getting around things like shutdowns of networking and so on. I can strongly recommend it. It's a bit old-fashioned, but it's bulletproof. Now, I'm kind of guessing that most of you may have heard of NJMon, but if you haven't, I'd hope that you've heard of NMon. And NJMon is Nigel's Java-based version, new version of NMon, and he's got various Python-based facilities for collecting and injecting into various databases. His particular choice at the moment is InfluxDB. It's actually called NJMon because it uses JSON format, JSON format. Sorry, I didn't mean to say Java just now. I do have an idea what it's all about. If you haven't heard of NJMon, I do recommend you to look at some of the past sessions that we've had on these VUG sessions. And also, Nigel tells me that there's going to be some good entries about NJMon on his YouTube channel coming up. Any reason why NMon is, I saw a question there, is it not part of the AIX packages? Can some, Joe, did you see that question?
NMon is part of the AIX package, yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. NJMon isn't, but NMon definitely is. You can run NMon on AIX and it runs topaz_NMon, or you can download classic NMon from sourceforge.net. I haven't particularly got the links to it there, but yeah, if you run NMon on AIX, I think pretty well any supported version of AIX, and it'll just work.
And AIX, I mean, run NMon on AIX or Linux, right? It works on both.
Yes, some Linux distributions it will be there, or you can pull it directly from a Yum repository or whatever. Other ones you might need to go and get it. It all depends on the particular distro. Okay, now some of these things will be specific to Linux or Bash. So again, nice trick from Nigel. He was trying to find Python 3 for his Grafana project. It needed to be on Power, it needed to work on RHEL 7.6, and yes, it did have to be version 3. And we couldn't find it anywhere, but he found that if you did a Yum install of this repository, it gets you the EPEL repository, which is the extra packages for enterprise Linux, and in there was Python 3. So useful tip there. Now I'm beginning to play around far more with Red Hat. I wonder why that would be. So yes, that's going to be a useful repository for us to know about. Something that you can do in Linux, which is quite nice, is that you can run a command to change the output of date, so that at the end of date it doesn't create a new line. And so what you do here is you translate the new line at the end into just a space, or this is probably a tab actually, and then you can run a command. So here I'm doing a forever, tell me what the date is, that's a timestamp, and then tell me how much space I'm using in var log, sleep for a minute, and then rotate around. So that's just giving me a nice timestamp. At first I thought this was quite a nice one, but it turns into really being a gimmick after a while, but it was on the CLI Magic Twitter feed. You can set a prompt command in Bash, pardon me, and say if $? In other words, if the status of the previous command wasn't 0, so if the previous command failed, put a printf, in this case 007, that's a bell character and a new line. And so if you run a command that doesn't work, it says oops, and then makes a beep noise. It's a bit tedious after a while, but it might be useful for some people. Now, we all know the ls command, and ls-l gives you a long listing, including a timestamp. So here we've got the size, we've got the time that this particular file was written. Not terribly specific. It was written on July the 13th, 2016. But Command Line Magic came up with a couple of nice things here. So you can change the time style. Now this is GNU ls. It's not available in AIX ls. You can of course install that version of ls onto AIX if you want to. So here I've got a couple of aliases, and basically they're the same, but they just give the time in a slightly different format. So this is getting down to, although it's quite a long time ago, it's telling me down to the second what time of day that particular file was written, and this is the sort of standard time style. This is actually quite a useful format for the time, because it's quite easy to parse and change rearrange the order of the fields and so Nigel and I have worked on that kind of thing quite a bit over the last couple of years. Now you may want to sleep for less than a second. So there's actually a thing called a micro sleep or U sleep, and this sleeps for a millionth of a second. Of course, a millionth of a second isn't necessarily, you've got to remember that if you're using shared processors, you might not be on the processor for all the time, and you might be on a context switch out to somewhere else, but you might want to sleep for half a second or something, and this at least gives you a chance of doing something like that. And the history command, or there's the fc-l command, or you can give it a particular number to list the number of commands that you want to have in your history. fc-l works in the Corn shell, and it also works in Bash. This particular set of information from this young lady, Anne Robson's development blog, I picked this up, very useful, because if you've got multiple Bash screens open on the same server, you will only collect history by default for one of them and for only 500 commands. And you might think 500 is quite a lot, but it might be a lot for this session, but if you did something 2 or 3 days ago, it might not be in the 500, especially if it was in a different window. And so I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail, but you can see that there's quite a nice set of processes which he carries out to, for example, change the history size to 100,000 lines, and also to allow you to have a different Bash history file for each and every one of your windows which are open. Little trick here to echo a particular screen sequence, and this just puts a clock that changes every second up at the top right hand corner of the screen. No matter whereabouts you are, your cursor, it'll just every second it'll update the screen. Bit expensive on networking because every second it's sending the time to the top of the screen, but it can be quite nice if you're monitoring something to have a time actually in the window that you're using. How are we doing on time? 5 o'clock, nearly 5 to 5. Okay, a few things about the hardware. This was a question which came in. I know how I can find my serial number in AIX, but how do I find it in Linux? So on AIX you can run ls-atra, and you can look at the sys0, and you can find that you've got a particular system ID here. So on this case 780 or 78-04940 would be the serial number. You can run lsvpd on an HMC, and you can get the vital product data for the machine. So how do I do it on Linux? Well, there's various different ways. You can look at /proc/device tree, and then there's a system ID in there, and if you're on strings on it, you can find that. You've also got things like the lsvpd. Now you have to be root to run lsvpd on Linux. This came from a guy called Morten Dagmo, who's a great IBM colleague in Norway. And also, I'm just pointing out here the -C option. If you don't know what a capital C does on grep, it's very useful. It gives you context. And so what we looked for here was system VPD, which is this line here. And the C6 says, give me 6 lines. So it's giving me 6 lines each side of it. And that's useful because it does show me down here, I've actually got the SE, because if I look for SE, there's SEs all over the place. But notice how they are actually the same. So it should find you the serial number of the machine. Okay, now this is a very important thing, but I'm afraid it's a little bit vague. The reason it's vague is that I'm saying don't exceed the maximum queue depth for your storage. But what is your maximum queue depth? It will vary from storage to storage, from manufacturer to manufacturer. But if you exceed it, effectively it means that let's say that your disk has got a maximum queue depth of 10, and you send it 100 IO requests. it can't cope, and it will ignore however many come in after it's hit its maximum. So it's worth finding out what the maximum is by talking to your vendor, and then you can change the queue depth. The ls-atra command tells you what it's set to at the moment, and the fact that it's set to be true, well, that true means you're allowed to change it. So you could change it with the chdev command. Definitely worth doing that. Don't make your LPAR memory too big. You might be tempted to say, well, you know, I only need 256 gigabytes. I'll set the minimum to be a bit less than that, maybe 128. But hey, let's make the maximum to be huge. Well, the trouble is that the page table size for the LPAR is a 64th of the maximum size of the memory. It has to be that in case you use dynamic LPAR in order to expand it. So in this case, your page table size will be 16 gigabytes when it could be as low as 4 gigabytes. Now, to you, 12 gigabytes might not be a lot of memory, but to me, it's quite a lot of memory. It's another LPAR's worth of memory, quite possibly. So do try to keep your maximum memory setting to be reasonable compared to your desired. The other thing is that if your memory is very big, or the maximum memory is very big, the hypervisor may choose to split the memory which it's using over multiple nodes. So instead of having your 256 gigabytes sitting nicely inside one of your drawers or nodes, or people call them keks of their E980, it could be sitting in 2 or 3 of them, and that's not going to help your performance at all. I mentioned before, there's no more DVD internally in the Power 9 servers. You can use external USB DVD drives. There's various options for that. IBM do some nice ones. There's a 19-inch rack mounting version which will take RDX drives and DVD drives and so on, or you can have a little one that's a sort of caddy shaped type thing. If you do get one, do plug it into the USB sockets on the front because they have more power. If you buy one other than the IBM versions, we do recommend that you get one which has got an external power connection so that you can plug DC power into it, because these are not PCs. They're not designed to be driving DVDs all the time. So it's better to have something which you can plug your own USB power into. But it's better these days generally to use USB memory sticks. We do suggest that you buy several of them. You may not be allowed to use them at all, in which case, okay, game over. But if you are allowed to use them, it's always useful to have a few spares. 8 gigabytes or bigger. The last time I bought USB memory sticks about a month ago, 16 gigabyte ones were 2 pence cheaper than 8 gigabyte ones. So I went for the 16s, but buy fast ones, buy good quality ones, buy them from a trusted manufacturer and, importantly, a trusted supplier. There are plenty of reports on the internet of people who are buying what they believe are good quality brand USB sticks, but in fact they turn out not to be. So it's a 128 gigabyte, I don't know, maybe let's say Kingston or SanData or SanDisk or something, and in fact they've only got the ability to store 64 megabytes or something. It's worth maybe reading the reviews as well, and also do check out the performance bandwidth specifications, because just because something is USB 3 does not mean that it's going to give you better performance than something that's USB 2. It does depend on the manufacturer. It's worth checking those specifications in detail. They're not expensive, and so it's worth spending the extra 50 or pence or a pound or a dollar or whatever to get one which is actually much better than one which is a cheap interloper. Nowadays, of course, storage, we've got solid state disks, and the latest iteration of solid state disks are NVMe, non-volatile memory devices, and it's possible to see the amount of of usage that these devices have. They will wear out eventually. That's part of the design feature. You get very, very high performance, but they don't last forever. And so this is using Diag, and you go into task selection, and you can look at NVMe general health information. So this is underneath our hex. You can see in this particular case, we've used 17% of the estimated system life. My understanding is that if your device wears out in less than 5 years and you've been using it in the anticipated manner, then you can get one replaced under the sort of service warranty, assuming that you've got hardware maintenance contract. But it's a good way to keep track on how much you're using your device. And this is the NVMe manager command. And again, you can see on this one, in fact, this was the previous screen. This screen came from a lab in Austin, Texas, where they'd been really hammering these devices for some time. And this was one that Nigel and I had, and we'd been using it. And even after we'd had it for about 2 months, we'd only used 0% of the system life. So they do last for quite a long time, but they're not designed for database use, for example. They're designed for things like booting the operating system. They are very good, very high quality, high speed devices. I think I've only got one slide on firmware, which is it's important to keep checking your firmware is up to date. You can download the firmware updates from the Fix Central website, and this is a useful command that you can run. I tend to run it once a week, and you can see here that what I'm doing is I'm doing an ls-lick, lists me the license internal code in a for loop for all of these machines, and the resource I'm checking against is the IBM website. I'm lucky enough that my HMCs can access the internet, and then I'm printing out the EC number, the installed level, the concurrent retrievable level, and sorting them. So you can see that our Power 7 machines and our Power 9 machines are up to date. Our Power 8 machines do need to be updated. So Nigel and I need to sit down sometime and see when we're going to be able to do those concurrent updates on our Power 8 kit. Okay, IBM I. I don't know much about IBM I. I'm not an expert. People don't send me very many tricks, but if you do, I will happily put them up there. But I've just got a few here. I can't really talk too much about them, but if you're an IBM I specialist, they might help you. So this one here is creating some form of spool file for hex dumps for the last time that you booted the machine. And so that might be of use to you. Thanks to Josef for sending that in. He sent in this one as well. So this is creating a spool file for installed software information. And this is for disk controllers with cache batteries. And this is internal systems objects used to track every job on a partition. So, I mean, I really don't know anything about IBM I, but if you've got tips and tricks, please do send them to me, and I'll do my best to help out. There is something else that I can do, and that's coming up in a section on or a slide under the resources, which we're coming to now. Now, at the beginning of the session, Joe gave us a big plug for TechU. He's absolutely right. The technical universities are the premier events to go to get information about power systems. We tend to share them with either storage and or the mainframe cousins that we have. They tend to be in quite nice places. Sometimes they are in not such wonderful places. But that was Hammersmith. But certainly coming up, we've got Thailand. I'm hoping to get to Las Vegas. I don't know whether I'll be able to get there. There's Brazil, Sydney. I haven't made it out to Asia Pacific yet. Johannesburg. Definitely we'll be going to the conferences. Oops, Daisy. Nigel and I will definitely be going to the Prague one in Czech Republic in October, and as Joe said, he's got some discount tickets which you can use. But I'd say if you are in the UK, rather than using those, Joe will kill me for saying this, but perhaps use your local IBM contact as the representative to name. But if not, do use Joe. They
absolutely use your local one, and the discount really, guys, only applies to the one in Vegas. So the discount code that I have is really only work for the one in Vegas. Sorry about that. Glad you put these other ones up there, though, Gareth. I didn't even think to mention them. It's great that you put them up there. Wish I could make some of them.
I like the pictures.
Yeah.
You can't beat a bit of eye candy. The link at the bottom, the PDF will be posted, and the link at the bottom will take you off to the page, and you can register for these. I'm not sure. The one in Brazil looks good as well. That's a lovely looking beach. Perzel.org. Now, Michael Perzel, German, he's doctor, he's a brilliant IBMer, and he has got most of the GNU stuff which is available ported to AIX, and so you can download the RPMs from there. It's very useful. We've got the fixed level recommendation tool. If you're not familiar with that, it's worth going and having a play. You can tell it what version of software you're running on, firmware and software you're running on all of your machines, the version of the IO server, operating system, and so on, and it will tell you whether or not you ought to think about upgrading, and also give you guidance as to the order that you ought to do things in. Now, we've got this thing. Anybody heard of the Power Systems Virtual User Group? So I do give these sessions at conferences, and not everybody who goes to the conferences goes to these or attends these sessions. So obviously this is useful because it's got the website, so somebody might get this presentation sent to them, and they'd also be able to then go off to see Joe's. I think Joe and Jyoti are going to be merging. Jyoti's, oh no, sorry, out of turn. This is the next one which Joe did plug at the beginning. It's coming up next week. And then this is Jyoti's website. She's got 2,000 subscribers. It's worth going along to or drop her an email and subscribing, and then you'll get an email for all of the ones which she is hosting.
And we share a YouTube channel, so all of her replays and all the Power Systems VUG replays are on the same YouTube channel. And Gareth, if you back up to the Power Systems VUG one, your the short URL you have on there is the old one. That one won't work anymore.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that should be. Okay.
We'll have to change that. Yep.
Thanks for pointing that out, Joe. Yep, this is the next one that Jyoti's doing, which is. Why is that jumping? She did one. Actually, I've got yesterday's one in there. So that's the trouble when you're trying to present or trying to write the PowerPoint more than 2 days in advance. Another one, I promised you something about IBM I. Therese Eaton, TE, her pick and mix. Therese is a Swedish lady, but she lives in the UK, and she's a bit of an IBM I person. She and Jyoti are two of the main IBM I people we work with. And she does a thing called TE's Pick a Mix. If you drop her an email, she will gladly add you to the mailing list. She keeps 3 copies, one for clients, one for IBM business partners, and one for IBMers. It contains all sorts of useful tips and tricks and things regarding mainly hardware and IBM I. So it's worth, if you're an IBM I person, definitely worth going on to there. And do follow her on Twitter at TE Tweetings. Nigel's got his YouTube channel. I think you should all be aware of that. If not, do go along and do subscribe. He's got nearly 4,000 subscribers now. Amazing. And his jokes are fantastic. So it's definitely worth going along. And some of these fast facts, I actually recommend that if you are going to listen to some of these fast facts, play around with how to slow down the playback, because he's trying to get things in like 9 minutes and 57 seconds. So he's trying to get down to 10 minutes. And and so he's cut out all the spaces, all the breathing, and so if you play it at sort of 3/4 speed or half speed, you won't lose anything, and you might gain a bit. And that's not a criticism. It's good that the movies are punchy, so that's all good stuff. People to follow on Twitter. We've got me at the top, and then Nigel, then Jotty, Chris Gibson, who's that Australian guy I was talking about. Rob McNally, very knowledgeable, writes very often in the AI Systems mag. We've got a customer here, the Ironmonger. He's very positive about power machines in general, but he uses IBM I as well as AIX. Here's Therese, Joe. We've got some other good people here. Notice Power HA guy. Now, if I go to there and I go to Twitter, this is one of the reasons why you want to be following people on Twitter. So Sean Bodley, Power HA guy, just tweeted 2 hours ago. There's that one of his colleagues has found a thing with a new V7000 that basically they've changed the way that things work for worldwide port names between the current version and the previous versions. And so if you're on Twitter, you'll get to hear about these things very, very quickly. So it's definitely worth following people on Twitter. Now, we don't tend to tweet about, I had lamb and chips for lunch. We don't tend to tweet about, oh, isn't this a beautiful beach? We tend to be tweeting about power systems. So that's a good thing to do. Command Line Magic, I've mentioned them a couple of times. They're worth following. There's a guy called John Cook who does Unix tooltips. Very useful little one-liners and things like that. CLI, Command Line Magic. Regex tips, so this again is John Cook's consultancy. So these people have quite often got multiple sections, and there's one line here, Command Line Foo. I'd hate to think what FU might stand for, but something I find quite useful actually. I do use Twitter a lot, but quite often you'll see an advert for, I don't know, hearing aids, or were you born before 1950 and you want to have a pension, and they come up every day. If you click on the logo of the tweet, you get to a point where you can select this sort of dotted menu, and then you can block them. So instead of getting it every day, you only get it the once, and then you've blocked them. Another thing just to mention, I do follow some things which I only want to really know about when I'm traveling. So what's happening on the roads in the United Kingdom. And so when I'm not going to be traveling, I mute them. And then instead of having to work out which part of the highways agency I want to follow again, I just need to go into my muted accounts and unmute them. So it's just something you can do. And there are some useful little blogs here. So I've got a blog called Power Tricks, so I'll be posting some of these things up there. There's Nigel's HPUT blog. Rob McNally has got his Systems Mag blogs and robmcnally.com, and Chris Gebbo's got his blog there as well. So I just about managed to squeeze 106 foils into the time.
Wow, with time to spare.
Have I missed the question, or were there many questions? I don't know. I saw a couple flash up, but I don't know if we've covered them.
No, yeah, I think we've got those covered.
Yeah, Nigel's done a great job of answering the questions.
Oh, good.
Let's see if there's anything. I don't know, Nigel. You've been covering them a little bit more than me, so.
How important is an HMC CCD backup? Well, it's a fair question. All of the partition information is stored in the service processor of each of the machines. I have in the past made a point of backing up CCD from HMCs over the network to a remote FTP server or something on a sort of weekly basis, and then doing it manually if I change anything. But to be honest, these days, well, I haven't done a CCD backup for a very long time. I think it's more important to have two HMCs which are connected to both or all of your machines rather than anything else. Any reason why NMON's not part of IBM packages in AIX in the base? NJMON is available from which AIX server? Which AIX version? I think it's whatever you can run it on.
It's Nigel here. The source code is public, so you can try it if you like. It relies on the libperstat library, which does change from version to version, but was supporting 6.1.7.1.7.2.
So anything that's current, anyway.
Yep.
Let's see. So when we're done with this, the recording, I'll put the recording up as soon as I can get it downloaded and uploaded and everything. So it'll either be later today or at least by Monday. I'll say that. Okay.
Okay, and as I say, if anybody's got any tips which they think might be of use to other people, if it's something that isn't, obvious and you use it every week or every month, then send it along to me, and I'll probably put it into the next session, and I'll happily give you credit. If there is, please don't send personal information, IP addresses, passwords, and things like that. I don't want to lose my job, but I'm happy to share the knowledge amongst everybody.
And Gareth went through this at a nice pace, but there's a lot of stuff in there, as you're going through slides that you can't take down or anything. So all of Gareth's slides are on the presentation materials that are on the wiki. So, and I put a link to the wiki out there on the chat and the questions, so you can go and download those. So you take your time and go through and try all the tips. And I think the YouTube channel names are out there. There's one for Nigel, and then Gareth had some in the back of his, I thought, too.
For the actual virtual user group, if you go to the virtual user group website, you will find the links there to the videos as well.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that's probably it then. Gareth, thank you so much for doing this. I know you did it once for us a couple of years ago, and there's new tricks out there, and this was just, I think, fantastic information. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Happy to help.
And Nigel, thanks for handling all the questions. I think you really helped out there getting questions so that people weren't waiting to the end. Appreciate that.
No problem.
So thank you, guys. Everybody have a great rest of July and beginning of August. And if you're IBMI people, I hope you can join next week. With that, we'll call it a day. Thank you so much.
Bye, folks.